Hey folks, welcome back to Frankenstein. We are in volume 2, chapters 1 through 2, where the monster's story begins. Hasn't the monster's story already started on page 1? Yes. But this is where we begin the section of the monster actually telling you the story for himself. And forgot to say this here at the beginning, but congratulations on finishing volume 1. So, quick review. The last section we looked at, we saw sadly the death of William Frankenstein, which is Victor's youngest brother. Not only is he dead, but he was murdered. We looked then at the case that was made against Justine Moritz, which eventually came down to this locket, a locket that had Victor's mother's picture in it. Victor himself knows that Justine Moritz is innocent, but he doesn't say anything to help her out, basically. Why doesn't he say anything? In his defense, he would say that who would believe him, and then who could actually capture the monster. Where we left off then, Justine Moritz was on her way to being executed for a crime that she did not commit. We also talked about a couple of themes which are going to continue throughout the novel, including in the section we're looking at. These themes of remorse and responsibility, and also of revenge. Victor Frankenstein has a very complicated relationship with all of these, so just keep those in mind. That's me moving a piece of paper in case you're wondering what that noise is. But these themes also relate to another theme that we should talk about, which is grief in the novel. Prior to this moment, we've had people talking about grief, but I just want you to keep in mind that as a potential thing. Watch for how characters in the novel suggest how other characters in the novel should deal with grief. So, for instance, here in Volume 2, Chapter 1, Alphonse, Victor's father, is going to tell him about how he should deal with grief. But not only should we watch for how other characters tell characters to deal with grief, we should watch for how characters in the novel actually deal with grief. So when you look here in this chapter, you see quite a bit that's taking place with Victor Frankenstein and the others in this post-Justine world. For Victor, he feels tremendous amounts of guilt. He feels guilty, he feels depressed, he isolates himself, he's suicidal. Actually, he is suicidal. You can stop the tape at this point and look at this quote here, and you'll see him pondering death via suicide. He recognizes the murder and execution have affected everyone in the family. Alphonse's health is worse, and Elizabeth has lost her joy. Victor recognizes that the monster is still out there. The monster could do worse. The monster may target Victor's family. His father, with William's killer, had urged Victor to refrain from seeking vengeance, but Victor wants to kill the monster. That's what he wants to do. So let's see how that unfolds as a theme in the novel. We're still back here in Geneva. We're going to move away from Geneva proper, but we're just moving around in that area. There's a picture of Geneva about that point in time. Victor returns to nature, and he goes into these beautiful, rugged areas of the Alps nearby. You can look these places up. They're actually quite spectacular, and the places you're reading about in the novel are actual places. There's one particular place that's mentioned. There's another place of Mont Blanc, and here is this glacier or ice field that we're going to come across. It's interesting that Mary Shelley's, in fact, first published work was History of a 6 Weeks Tour, which covers her time in these very areas. So when she's writing these scenes, she's writing them. This book was published in 1817. She did this visit back in 1816, and Frankenstein, the novel, is going to be published in 1818. Anyhow, when she's writing these scenes, she's writing them within a relatively short period of time of when she'd actually gone to these areas. Nature, though, is there to make Victor feel better, basically, or to draw him out of himself. This book I've made reference to before, The New Annotated Frankenstein, has some cool remarks about that. You can pause this. I won't read this, but this is kind of interesting about Percy Shelley and what he would do when he and Mary were in this area. One important word I do want you to note, I won't read all of this section, you can pause and look this up, is the word sublime. That's a really important term when you're talking about romantic authors like the Shelleys and the Byrons. And here, this is also from the new annotated Frankenstein. It's got some nice background on that. But you could also look that up in like a literary dictionary or something like that. So Victor is out and about. He's eventually going to leave the party behind and go off by himself. That's not to be surprised. But I did want you to notice this one phrase he says. He talks about the mighty Alps, whose white and shining pyramids and domes towered above all as belonging to another race, the habitations of another race of beings. An interesting remark in light of what's coming, but here you can see the Alps and you can understand why he would have that point of view. Absolutely spectacularly beautiful. So as I said, Victor goes off by himself. It's again part of his grief, part of his isolation, and it talks about how his heart is full. Here in the part, this is chapter 2. My heart, which was being before sorrowful, now swelled with something like joy. So Victor is overcoming his melancholy, his depression to some extent, and he exclaims, wandering spirits, some invocation to spirits. This isn't a Christian prayer. If indeed ye wander and do not rest in your narrow beds, allow me this faint happiness, or take me as your companion away from the joys of life. There's a lot going on in that little thing, but I want you to know he prays for the wandering spirits, and who should show up but the number one wandering spirit, his creation. The photo you're looking at here, it's not a photo, the picture you're looking at here, the drawing, is of course the last time we saw the creature when he was pulling this bed curtain away, and Victor was horrified by him and he ran out of the house, and that's the last we've seen him. It's been, just shy actually of 2 years since we've seen the creature. But this depiction by Lynn Ward, who does these amazing pieces of art, he's deceased, but he did these amazing works of art for a bunch of different things. But anyhow, here's perhaps a much more accurate depiction of what's going on there. It's interesting that you note, so he sees, let me say this before I get to that point, is that we see the monster initially at a distance, and the monster has superhuman speed, and he also has superhuman agility. The idea that you get from the movies of the monster being this clunky thing, that is not in the novel. In the novel, he is agile, he is athletic, he is strong, and he is smart, and he can talk. So Mary Shelley's vision of this monster is almost entirely at odds with how people commonly think of the monster. Now, back here to the story, we're on this glacier field, this ice field. The monster's leaped about it. He's run across it like an antelope. He comes up to his creation, and Victor's first word to his creation, at least his first recorded word, is devil. So you might contrast this with, if you have your Bibles, look at Genesis 1 and 2 and watch how God deals with his creation in Genesis 1 and 2 and compare that here with Victor's dealing with his own creation. There's quite a bit of a contrast that goes on there as well. So the monster is able to talk as well, which again is not the way we usually think of the monster, but absolutely the monster can talk, and we're going to find out in the monster's story how he learns to talk, how he learns to speak, how he learns to read, how he becomes such an intelligent, eloquent, and erudite, a word that I just wanted to use for fun. Anyhow, he becomes quite a being. The monster's first words, I don't want to do any spoiler alerts, but I want you to mark these here in chapter 2 of volume 2, because those first words actually say quite a lot. Just come back to them when you finish the novel. For the next third of the novel, we're going to hear the creature's story in the creature's voice, at least as related to Robert Walton, via Victor Frankenstein. For the next third of the novel, we'll hear the creature's story, and at the end, he's going to propose his deal to Victor. Right now, we don't know what he wants, and the rest of the novel will then show the consequences to Victor's choices concerning a deal with, in his words, a devil. here you go. I'm just going to stop there, or you can stop there if you want and look at these first words, or if you're following along in your book, you can follow those as well. One important thing that we need to note for the structure of the story is that we're now being introduced to our third narrator. Our novel has 3 narrators, which shows it to be, it has a level of complexity to it. And again, I always like to say just how good a writer Mary Shelley is. But anyhow, 3 narrators. We started with Robert, we'll end with Robert. We then went to Victor, and we'll come back to Victor, but this is the part where the creature gets to tell his story. And I think it's really interesting, actually, if you think about the setting, all 3 tales are told on the ice. Robert Walton is writing his story from the North Pole. Victor Frankenstein is telling Robert Walton the story while they are in the ice in the North Pole. And the creature here is telling his story to Victor while they're on this ice field. So all 3 narrators, all 3 narrations take place on the ice. Here's one depiction of it that's kind of interesting. The monster doesn't seem to be as affected by cold as human beings are. So I want us to consider here as we close out today is the rhetoric in the creature. This might be something you'd be interested in looking at. There's lots of speeches in the novel, and you could do a rhetorical analysis of this. As you look at the rhetoric in the creature, I want you to, as you read the story, I want you to note how persuasive he is. I'm going to predict that you're going to find yourself sympathizing with the creature. How he does that? Sorry, I got my notes out of line. Perhaps he's a more sympathetic creature than Victor is, and maybe he's at least at this point in the novel, it's easier to sympathize with the creature because we have no proof of what Victor thinks. We have no proof that the monster did anything to William, let alone to Justine. But we do know that Victor has behaved badly. He's abandoned his creation because it was ugly, and he truly did not help Justine when he could have helped. So at this point, there's really no reason not to be sympathetic to the creature, and I think that's a brilliant plotting point by Mary Shelley. But as you read the story, I want you to note how the creature, there's a typo there, y'all. Let's leave it. Note how the creature tries to persuade. And indeed, he is trying to persuade. There's this line here in chapter 2. How can I move thee? So he's going to tell his story, and at the end, he's going to let Victor Frankenstein make his decision. So this whole story is an effort to persuade Victor to do whatever it is that the monster wants him to do. And it's also an effort to try to persuade us. It's very clearly there that this is an effort at persuasive. So how's he going to do it? You could analyze this speech here, or any speech here, for how it works in terms of logos, ethos, and pathos. I apologize, this slide's a little weird looking, but anyhow, here in this chapter, I want you to notice how he appeals to his creation, his being, and his experience. That's one thing he does. He appeals to Victor's role as a creator and what creator, I always say that word too fast, and what that should entail. And he appeals with threats to Victor, his family, and to untold thousands. The creature is going to play nice so long as Victor, who wants to kill him, listens to his story. We don't yet know what the monster wants, but we will once he's finished his story. His story and his deal all wait for us in the coming chapters. To be continued. Y'all have a good one.